The WoW community can be kinda rancid sometimes. It's almost a hallmark of the Mythic Plus experience. Someone misses a kick, the tank pulls weird, the healer falls behind, and then suddenly party chat turns into an absolute crime scene. Despite this though, I don't actually think that toxicity is as simple as people make it out to be. Because yes, even though there is some outright toxic people in the game, I also think that players are very quick at labeling anything that is even remotely uncomfortable to themselves as toxic. That creates its own problem, because criticism isn't toxicity. So today, I wanted to talk about how to separate criticism from useless toxicity, how to absorb feedback without getting instantly defensive, and how to deliver criticism in-game to other players without becoming a toxic moron. Because I actually think that you can use toxicity to your advantage. Not because toxicity itself is good, but because buried underneath it, there is often a piece of information that you can actually use. First up, let's actually define what toxicity is. This might seem kind of pointless because everyone kind of knows what outright toxicity looks like when it happens. Someone's telling you to uninstall, or calling you brain dead, or saying you were boosted, or telling you to Alt F4 life, then obviously that fits the mold of toxicity. But I think it gets a little bit blurrier when we start talking about criticism, because I actually see a lot of people labeling things as toxic that aren't actually toxic. They're just uncomfortable to the person receiving them. There is, I think, a pretty easy way to break this down though. Criticism is usually fine when it's focused on a specific action or something that happened in the game. It becomes toxic when the criticism moves beyond the thing that happened and turns into an attack on the person themselves. So let's use an example. A few weeks back, my group was turbo bricking the first pull of a plus 20 seat. The reasons aren't really important, but let's just use this as an example. Let's say that one of the culprits of these bricks was me missing Blessing of Freedom a few times on the subjugated chains. If someone in my group was to say, "Bog, are you stupid? Were you dropped on your head as a child? How did you miss that freedom?" Is that toxic? Well, obviously, yes. The mistake is still there, but the comment itself is not trying to solve everything. It's taking the error and using it as an excuse to attack the person who made it. Now, compare it to something like this. "Bog, you need to freedom the cast as it starts. It's really bad taking a tick there." That isn't toxic. It might not feel great to hear because you're the one that made the mistake that bricked the key, but the comment itself is specific. It's about the action that went wrong, and it's something that you can actually fix. Now, what about a more pug-style version? Someone types in party chat, "Terrible ret, no freedom, question mark." That one is toxic. Not because they pointed out that I missed the ability, but because it turned into a statement about me as a player. This is the main difference. All three comments are about the exact same thing. The actual feedback underneath is identical. I should have used freedom earlier to stop the ticking debuff from the chains. But the delivery of each of them is completely different. This is where I think people do get a bit lost. Calling out a mistake is not automatically toxic, but taking that mistake and using it as an indictment on the person who made it usually is. That's the big distinction, because players do tend to get overly defensive when their own mistakes are pointed out. I'll touch a bit more on this shortly, but there is a more important point here. If we think about the situation just before, the consistent thing was that the mistake that was made was present in all of the remarks. What we can learn from this is that even when criticism is delivered badly, it will often contain useful information still. That doesn't excuse the toxicity. If someone's been a dickhead, they're still being a dickhead. But as a player, if you can look past the delivery for a second, you can actually see, hey, there might be something here I can use. The thing is, people really don't like being criticized. There are a number of reasons why this happens, but a lot of it comes down to the fact that criticism can feel like a threat to a person's sense of self. When someone tells you that you did something incorrectly, the actual wording might be something like, "You made a mistake on this pull, here's a better way to handle it." What a lot of people actually hear is, "You are bad." Self-defense then becomes the immediate response. This is the thing I think we can subvert a little bit though. If you make a mistake and someone responds by insulting your intelligence or making an off-color remark about your mother or bullying you for indulging in lead-based paint as a child, that person is obviously being toxic. But the important question we can ask is there anything useful underneath it? The same applies when criticism is delivered constructively, but you still feel attacked by it. Brush that off as well. While I would obviously prefer for everyone to be kind and reasonable when giving feedback, the reality is we don't often control how other people deliver criticism. We can only control what we do once it reaches us. If we can divorce our reaction from the exact way that something was presented to us, we can often see an underlying message there. Was the way that you pulled the first area of Elgathar bad because you moved too much? Should you have used a major defensive in that last pull instead of relying on the healer? Did you miss a mechanic? Whatever the specific example is, the theme is the same. If you're open to the idea that you might be wrong and that you can improve, you will improve. The other thing here is we all suck at WoW. Like, there are so many moving parts in this game that it is almost impossible to play perfectly. I think about it a little bit like chess. For those that don't know, modern chess engines are so far better than the best human players in the world that they will comfortably beat the strongest grandmasters with ease. Compared to computers, humans are terrible at chess. But if a grandmaster reviews a game and the engine tells them that they blundered, they don't sit there arguing with the computer about how toxic it is. They try to understand why the move that they made was bad. This obviously isn't a one-to-one parallel with World of Warcraft, but the principle is very similar. Even the best key pushers in the world will make constant mistakes. The difference is that good players are able to look at the mistakes without turning it into an attack on their identity as a person or as a player. If you can do that, criticism also becomes a lot less threatening. If the toxicity washes over you a bit more because you're no longer treating every negative comment as a verdict on who you are, you can look at it with one simple question: is there anything I can use here? If the answer's yes, then take it. If the answer's no, you throw it away and move on. On that note, I do want to touch on how to actually deliver criticism in WoW without being a toxic asshole, because I think there is a reason that people tend to lean towards toxicity more often than you might expect. When studying psychology, road rage was a pretty common example used to illustrate a few mental patterns and behaviors. This might seem like an odd tangent, but sit with me for a sec. One of the big driving forces behind road rage is anonymity and separation. When you're in a car, the consequences of negative social behaviors are buffered a little bit. You're isolated from the other person, you probably don't know them, and you're probably never going to see them again, so there's very little immediate consequence for acting like a complete freak. Because of this, even people who are normally pretty calm in their normal day-to-day life will become furious over things that are relatively small. On top of that, road rage actually shows a pretty common cognitive pattern, which is overgeneralization. When someone cuts you off in traffic, the normal reaction is usually not that person made a bad driving decision in this specific moment. It normally is something more like, you are a complete idiot. Now, to be fair, crossing 4 lanes of a highway in busy traffic with no indicator obviously isn't a very smart thing to do, but that single action doesn't necessarily mean that the person is an idiot as a whole. Our brains just tend to take one incident and generalize it to something much broader. WoW, I think, is very similar to this. The anonymity is obvious. We're all sitting behind our PCs, playing with people that we may or may not interact with again, in a game where the social consequences for being a dickhead are obviously very low. So it's the exact same thing as raging at someone in traffic. We also do tend to overgeneralize things. If a tank pulls an extra pull, it's suddenly, this tank is a complete idiot. If the healer can't keep people alive at a certain point in a dungeon, it becomes, this healer is boosted. If a DPS misses a utility button, it becomes, how are you even this IO? This is the pattern I want people to catch a little bit. Because most of the time, the problem isn't that someone made a mistake. The problem is that we turn that mistake into a judgment on the person themselves. So in delivering feedback, if we're mindful of this, we can also follow a pretty simple rule. Point out what went wrong, explain why it mattered, and then suggest what could be done differently next time. That's pretty much the whole blueprint. What happened? Why did it matter? What should you do next? And most importantly, do not attack the person's character. Obviously, some people will take criticism badly no matter how carefully you deliver it. That part's not really in your control. But if your feedback is focused on a specific action, the impact that that had, and then a better way of approaching it moving forward, you can be pretty confident that you've presented something constructively to a player, or at least within the best of your ability. So the next time you want to type something like, how are you 3.7k IO? You didn't use this specific utility spell in this pull. Just stop for a second and adjust it to something like this. Hey, Blessing of Freedom removes that debuff, makes the pull much easier to heal. Using it would probably stop us wiping next time. Same information, completely different framing. One version attacks the person, and the other version gives them something that they can use constructively. If your goal is to actually make the run better, the second version is almost always going to be more useful than the first. This video ended up being a little bit more like self-help adjacent than my usual stuff, but honestly, I did still want to put it out there because the way that players both deliver and receive criticism is pretty important. If you can recognize toxicity for what it is and separate it from a personal attack on you as a player, you can often grab the constructive elements out of the comments. That is really the main point. Toxicity itself isn't useful, but if the piece of information buried underneath it is, you might as well use it. If someone's been a dick, they're still being a dick. But if they're also accidentally pointing out something that you can use, don't just throw it away because the messenger is a clown. With all that being said, while we're talking about toxicity in pugs, I feel like this is a good time to mention something else. I'm debating doing a bit of a video series where I respond to some of the most deranged Mythic Plus pug stories the community has. Basically like tales from the trenches of M plus LFG or something. I'll leave a pinned comment below this video if you've got any wild stories from Mythic Plus, whether it's like toxic players or people having complete meltdowns or just some like confusing experience you've been a part of, let me know in the replies of the pinned comment. If there's enough interest in this, I'll turn it into an ongoing series and we can all have a laugh at some of the idiocy that happens in World of Warcraft. As always though, a huge thank you to my channel supporters, The Joy of Checks, Tobias, Yulem, and Is This Real at the Keystone Legend tier, as well as everyone else who supports my adventures here on YouTube. If you would like to support the channel yourself, you can either click the join button below, or you can follow the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. Thank you all for watching until the end. See you all in Azeroth. Until next time, take care.